All right, here we go.
What's good, everybody? I'm Robert Dickens Jr.
This is Ryan Reed.
This is Elanders Frazier.
This is John Gaal, and you're listening to Volta.
Changing the conversation
For percussion educators,
designers,
and performers.
I do. Hey, what's going on, everybody? I'm Robert Dickens Jr. This is Elanders Frazier, John Gaal, and Ryan Reed. We are Volta Percussion. Welcome to another episode, season 4, episode 2. We're super excited to jump into it. And today we're going to be talking about closing the skill gap between your players, which I think is super important. We're building a percussion program or any type of music education program is, what's that gap between like your best player and like the player that needs, the most improvement. So before we do jump into that, let's get a teaching tip from John Gaal.
Hey, what's up, everyone? For those that know me, those individuals know that I love sequences, love being efficient. And so typically when I'm teaching any type of rhythm to either the front or the battery, I try to break it down to a skeleton form like we all do, and then just add small segments with either 4 or 8 counts in between. Then slowly, it's really just a mental game for the students as we add on until they're working that rhythmic phrase or that melodic phrase on the keyboard. So my teaching tip for you today is actually using that same process, but incorporating it to marching drill. I've mentioned it many times here on the podcast before that I run the percussion program at my high school, but I'm also the band director. So my specific job, besides teaching winds and brass, is I really run the marching band. So I'm in charge of teaching all the drill and getting all the choreo and everything taught and make sure we're hitting our goals throughout the season. And after you've gone through the teaching phase of this is your chart, this is your front to back, this is your side to side, et cetera, and the kids start getting that, how do you actually start cleaning? I would say since we're typically, football season's just kind of getting started now, we're still kind of early on in the teaching season. Just starting to get in that cleaning phase, especially if you're in movement 1, you're starting to transition to movement 2, maybe movement 3, depending on where you are around the country. I have found sequences to be extremely helpful in cleaning drill. So when I'm talking about sequences, let's say you have a chart from, let's say, like we were talking about last week, chart 10 to chart 19, right? And you have some each of the counts are, let's say 8, 8, 16, 20, 24, 8, 8, 16 or whatnot. And so of course you have your drum major, say the charts, say repeat, everyone repeat backs all that 8, 8, 12, 16, 24, 8, 8, whatever I just said. I would have this written down so I would be able to remember it better. But instead of just going, all right, let's go chart 10 to chart 11. Okay, now chart 11 to chart 12. Chart 12 to chart 13. That can get very, mundane for the percussion section, especially if you have a front ensemble and they're not playing, you're just really focusing on drill. So what I've come up with is applying my rhythmic and my melodic sequences I teach my percussion section and incorporating into the drill. And so what that means is we go chart by chart, but instead of having, all right, check and adjust, okay, let's all mark it off. No, they have 8 counts to get it going, and then we go to the next one. So let's say we go chart 10 and chart 11, 8 counts. 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then they do a +1. They do a -1, and then we hit the next thing. So +1, -1, they look around, go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 +1. -1, here we go 2, 3, etc., until we go from like chart 10 all the way to chart 19, because I've already spent those individual charts cleaning that. Now we just need lots of reps, and the longer the reps, and typically it's a letter to a letter, like say letter G to letter I. By hitting those checkpoints in the music, I'm not having them play, they're just either counting out loud and focusing on the vis aspect. Or after we've done that a while, then we go to the next step of singing. And then, of course, percussion are playing along, especially if they're stationary. So they have to stay mentally engaged of each of the charts as well. And it's difficult to start in the middle of a phrase. I get that. But the goal is not to be able to start and stop anywhere in the music, which is awesome if we can do that. But really, it's to make sure you're hitting your dots, your forms in each of those charts. So when you go on a bigger phrase, we're going chart 10 to chart 19 without the 8 counts in between. They're able to string all those charts together visually, mentally, musically, etc. So teaching tip of the day, a sequence easily you can apply to your teaching drill. When you're starting to clean, put 8 counts in between, +1, -1, so they're incorporating the different dots and connecting all that together. Hope that's been helpful, and I'll pass it right back to you, Rob.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. I had a tech for my indoor group that marched Quest and Spirit, and she called it like the game. She used to teach the visual stuff, and that's once we got like a whole bunch of dots down, that's how we would go through all the dots. Is go from one page to the next, do a +1, then do a -1, and then keep going. That way you could just check all of them. I thought it was really cool. Yeah, I think that's super helpful. So jumping into our topic for today about skill gaps. This is something that I feel like is super important, especially if you're first starting at a program. When you get there, typically the gap between the best player and the player that needs the most improvement is pretty far. But I would venture to say that most programs that we consider to be great band programs, great music or arts programs, like the skill gap is pretty small, right? Because the player that needs the most improvement is still at a pretty good level. So I guess my first question for you guys would be, when you're approaching coming to a new group, whether that be a drum corps, indoor, anything like that, and you're first kind of establishing yourself, you're getting familiar with the talent that's there, like what's the first thing that you do to kind of try to one, maybe assess what the skill gap is, and then two, like how do you go about over time like closing that gap between those players?
I'll jump in on assessment because I think that's most programs. That's where I know that's where I start. I usually start with basic fundamentals, and it's usually timing exercises. But I would say basic fundamentals is the easiest way that I have found to make an assessment, because especially for students that already have a good background, we've taught open class core for a good chunk of time, but even coming into high school, they've typically had 2 or 3 years of middle school band. So starting with them with fundamentals, do they understand quarter note timing? Do they understand eighth note timing? Do they understand how to play eighth note triplets? Do they understand how to play an accent versus a tap? Do they understand what a C scale is? Do they understand, what the basic 12 major scales are? You know what I mean? Like those are things to where like I can easily assess like what have they done prior to us starting and what have they not. I feel like if you're starting a middle school program, you're really just trying to see if they understand rhythm. So that may be different. Maybe that's clapping to see if they understand how to clap, to see if they understand how to clap with their feet. Though there's always a way to do just like a basic assessment of fundamentals and whether or not those students can subscribe to it. And then once you've got that basic assessment down, then I think it kind of orders your steps in terms of where you're headed next. It may not necessarily tell you what to do with those individuals because every personality is a little bit different, right? Sometimes we have super eccentric personalities. Sometimes we have the kids that don't say a word at all. I've had those kids where I didn't hear you speak a word till your sophomore year. You know what I mean? But I think it at least informs you on kind of, okay, what can I start to get into next, or how fast can I move with this program based on where their core fundamental is. And it's always got to speak to the average, right? Because if you're only looking at where your worst player is versus your strongest player, you're going to be missing potential opportunities for information sharing, right? Because your older players might check out if you're only given basic information, and for your basic players, if you're only given advanced level information, it might be too far over their heads, and that can make them very frustrated, anxious, etc. So you always kind of have to speak to the medium to where you're reinforcing things that maybe the advanced players know, but they also are understanding you're going to continue to press things forward. And I think if you're transparent with the group, especially when you're in that assessment phase, letting them know that I'm just trying to fill out where everybody is. I want to see what everybody's capable of. And then once we kind of get that kind of settled, then we'll see where we're going to move on. Then I think a lot of the times, especially the advanced players, they'll be okay with you moving at that speed because they understand you're just trying to gauge where everything is.
Yeah, I'll tag off the assessment aspect of it a little bit. When I got to my school 5 years ago now, the first thing we did was we played everything to music. So we played just 8 on a hand, turn on music, play 8 on a hand, play whatever basic exercise, just some timing stuff. And then we made a circle, and I like turned music on, and it's like, all right, walk in the circle. All right, now walk backwards in the circle. All right, now hop to the half note to the music in the circle. And a lot of that is coordination games, because if a kid has pulse, there's not much you can't get them to do with the right level of instruction and the right method of instruction. So I think first is kind of seeing where their level of pulse is. And even with my front ensemble students, I am able to get a good idea of like, do I think this kid's going to be able to hang on marimba based on how they play a drum pad, based on the rhythmic control they have, the technical control they have of just drumsticks on a drum pad. And for me, that's something that I don't think we think about enough as front ensemble educators, is like, if a kid can't control a stick, they are probably going to struggle to control a mallet too. And a crusade that I've been fighting with my high school kids, and even the open class and world class kids that we teach, if you can't play a good double stroke, you probably can't play a really good lateral stroke. So just kind of I evaluate everybody on a drum pad first, and just walking in a circle and see where they go from there. And then I kind of put them into small groups of where I think they will be. And then the second or third time, and we'll do that 2 or 3 times. And then once we move beyond that, we'll do our battery auditions and our front ensemble auditions, specifically for marching band. And then there'll be some kids that'll surprise you of like, man, when you were walking, I thought you had 3 left feet. But now that I see you play your scales, you understand a little bit more. I don't know where that 3rd left foot came from them, but they grew it when they walk. But there's always some surprises that move the needle a little bit. But by and large, at least in my experience, I've been able to get kids pointed in the right direction based off that initial like drum pad to music and walking to music sequence. Plus it makes it a little bit more fun for them and a little bit more engaging. The other thing is, as they're walking, I'll have them walk but clap on 2 and 4 just to see who falls over, or clap to 1 and 3 as they're walking. Or I've had them clap like a dotted quarter note rhythm, like 1 and 4 while they're walking, just to see that kind of thing. So I think the assessment, sometimes we make the assessment aspect of our jobs too hard. Like for my middle school students, I assess all the beginners because I teach at the high school and middle school. Like my assessment starts with my incoming 5th graders of like, all right, hold the sticks, make your hands look like mine, hold your right hand up in the air. When they hold their left hand up in the air, they're a 3. Correct. And then it's like, play 8 on a hand. All right, now say the word paradiddle. All right, they say it back to me. Now we're going to play it. Paradiddle. All right, now play it off the other hand. Paradiddle. All right, now let's play a couple in a row. And we do that. And they're like, okay, they can either play along with me, or they're like, they look like Bambi walking for the first time. And that gives me a pretty good idea. And I'll do a little bit on mallets, but a lot of my assessing is, do you have pulse, and can you like move your hand like this?
So here's a follow-up question I have, two. Here's the main one though. So you do those assessments, I'm assuming, because I do the same thing for like our beginner play tests for our sixth graders and whatnot. And I think it's still good to do those assessments even as incoming freshmen or
Hmm.
whatnot, just as a checkpoint. But when you assess the students and you find that some students can hang and some students can't, specifically with the coordination, but you're at a small enough program that you have to take everybody, and like, how do you get those kids who don't have that coordination or have very little to get up to, I have coordination and I can play basic eight on the hand? I know it's going to take time. Like for me, I'm out there, I'm tapping on their shoulder, and I'm marching in time behind them, trying to help them as they're carrying a drum, basses or whatnot. Or I'm clicking my sticks next to them, or I'm tapping their legs. Uh, and you could encourage your kids to play at home, and they may or they may not. But what strategies have y'all found, specifically in the area of coordination, marking time, playing at the same time, that has helped those kids who are lacking or very unfamiliar with those moving body parts to bring it up to a closer aspect of, I'm a junior, I'm a senior, I've been doing this for a longer time, where I've been playing the same exercises, I kind of get this now?
I think some of it is you just got to let them struggle. I mean, obviously you can level all these exercises, and I do that a bunch with my students of like, this is what the ultimate exercise is, this is what one step down is, this is what one step down is, this is what one step down is. Like, start at whatever level you feel comfortable, or we all start at level one, and when you feel comfortable, go to level two, go to level three, go to level four. I think I've talked about that a little bit on here before. But so I do that with like tiers. But also, like my first year, we just did it every day. We just did walking to music every day. And I would pick out one or two kids, because you're not going to get all of them if you got a bunch of kids struggling. I'd walk right next to them in the circle and be like, one, two, three, four. Because I wasn't trying to teach them to march. We were just walking. You can start on whatever foot you want. You can walk however you want to, but you got to move your feet in time. And I would just get them to move their feet in time without worrying about like, what foot am I starting on, what foot has to hit the beat, how does my foot have to hit the beat. I don't care about any of that until you understand how your foot, like, one at the same time, not one, one. Can you do one? That's the main thing. um so for me it was like, you just got to do it over and over again, and you got to watch older kids do it and try to match them.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I use specifically for coordination is I use a lot of note add-ons. So the big three rhythms that come to mind is like eighth notes, triplets, and 16th notes. And that's something that I do with all of my percussionists, whether it be marching band or whatever else during the off season. Like we all drum on pads. We usually come on maybe like Mondays or so, and maybe we drum for maybe like 4 hours or so, but like the first 30 minutes or so is just me and everybody in the program on pads. And it's just, we do every kind of note add-on that we can possibly do. So like on the first measure, like you just play on one. Second measure, you play one and. A third measure, you play one and two. One and two and, right? We do the same thing with triplets. We do the same thing with 16th notes. And also, I think using what Ryan was saying about the levels, um, one, the older kids, how I try to balance like keeping them involved in that is, one, they're more aware of their technique. So like they can look at that aspect of it and look at how their stick is moving. Whereas like the younger kids are just like, am I playing the rhythm in time? Is my notes, are my notes lining up? That kind of thing. I think the other levels to that is I tend to give my older kids other ways that they can level it up themselves, since we're all on pads. They're not super loud pads, but like they can add new variables themselves. So like say for instance, once we get to like 16th note timing one note, I can have them, okay, I want you on the isolated sections, I want you to play diddles. If you can do that, you're gonna play one E and a two E and a three and a four E and a right on whichever hand. like you can add your own variables in, or we go through 16-note accent grid and we're going one at a time. Okay, well, you can already do this. You're comfortable with this. You feel good with it. I want you to start adding diddles to the accents, right? You feel comfortable with that? I want you to start moving the diddles around. Now, so I feel like that's one of the things that I try to use is one, I always do the same basic exercises every single year. I always come back to no add-ons every single year, no matter how good the kids are. Like one, they already know it. And then two, they always know there's a deeper level that they can go to, even in the most basic thing. I think the other thing is it also helps me with like pairing students together, is because it's like this kid is a junior, or let's say this kid's a sophomore. This kid's been through marching band and indoor. He already knows quarter note check. So this other little kid that's on rack that's trying to figure out how to play on 2 and 4, this other kid's a 10th grader, but he feels confident I can explain how to play on quarter notes and eighth notes to this other kid. So I think it also kind of empowers those mid-tier students and not just the upper tier students, that like they have a little bit of knowledge that's further than some of the ones that are coming behind them. And like they can use that knowledge to help someone else in addition to like learning more, because any level that we go to is just a more complex version of something that's very basic.
I think the other thing you got to remind your older students of when they're playing the basic stuff is that as we get towards the end of seasons, we have to start to overlook some things, like in order to get it to be clean. So even though they might remember if they just had indoor, hey, we were really, really clean. Yeah, but you got some junk in your hands that like we were just overlooking to get to be really clean. And now this is your opportunity to clean the junk out.
Start all the way back over.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that I feel like one of the things that I've been kind of working on, and I did this with the battery at Southwind this year, was like this sequence that I call like Papa John's. And it's just the idea that, Papa John's has a slogan like better ingredients, better pizza. And I think that when it comes down to fundamentals, that's the way that I think about fundamentals in general. Like there are certain things that it doesn't matter what the vocabulary is or what the musical context that you're putting it into. Like your doubles are only going to be as good as your ability to play timing exercises at different tempos with different dynamics, etc. So the more you have an opportunity to like just isolated, like focus on that. And for us, it was like in the morning that we just focused on like quarter notes. Let's get quarter notes in time. Let's get eighth notes in time. Let's get triplets in time. Like it kind of, for us, I felt like it kind of carried throughout the rest of the day. So that when we got to more complex things, it was a little bit more ingrained. Those basic things were already like the foundation was already there.
Let me follow up with my second question. When you guys are teaching all these fundamental concepts, I'm assuming this is either in your percussion class or after school or before school rehearsal. Have you found specifically in your experience, is it better in your mind to do all these things after school apart from the band, to do it during band class and pull the percussion students out, or to have your own percussion class during school?
I think sorry, Elanders. I think some of that is based on what your availability of your percussion guy is and the luxury. Like, not every school has the luxury of a percussion class or a percussion director that can come in during the day. And I'll even throw that question a little bit of a different way right now. So I teach at the middle school level, I teach the high school level, and I teach the marching band, but I'm on my own for the marching band with the front ensemble and the battery. So like for me, being in the position that I'm in, I do a lot of this stuff during the school day because we have our tiered level bands. But we have some kids that like obviously play different instruments during the day and then come to marching band and they play whatever they play, whether it's rack marimba, vibraphone, whatever. So the thing that I'm struggling with right now, to kind of tear off your question a little bit, is how do you hit all those kids in whatever situation you can have them in, hit all the fundamentals for those kids. Because like I see them during the day, but we're working on concert things during the day, and then in marching band we're working on marching band things, but I'm there with like 5 different subsections or 6 different subsections. Like I got my snares, my tenors, my marimbas, my vibes, my electronics, my racks, and I got to see all those kids and make sure they're all getting some sort of information. How do you hit all that?
Go ahead, Rob.
No, I was gonna ask. I mean, I've been in that situation. Good Lord, Ryan, I had a flashback.
Dude, it takes extensive just planning for all that.
Mm-hmm.
I think we talked about this last time too, because I think you were doing like a rehearsal and you were planning for it, but then you're also trying to figure out all the factors that could inhibit that rehearsal. And I think that what it comes down to is you just have to plan depending on how much time you have, and your rehearsal space is, I'd say, very important. Like for me, we do percussion and band kids at the same time. So typically I'm always taking the percussion kids into my office or into a practice room or whatnot. We have to split it off because we don't have, 6 marimbas in a tiny practice room. Right. So I have to plan, okay, we can do this skill set for 10 minutes and then we rotate to this station. We do this for 10 minutes, et cetera, et cetera. But it's hard, dude. And I think just planning is the biggest thing. But then you're like, well, I have to go to the middle school and then the high school and then the after school. When am I supposed to plan?
Right.
Go hire someone else to help you, Ryan. With all your
if only,
dollars.
Again, John, you're talking about a nice luxury there. But to go back to your question is how does somebody do that when they're by themselves and they're not in during the school day, and all you get them is that 6 to 9 or 3 to 6 or whatever marching band rehearsal, where in concert band they're maybe not getting the level of instruction that they need or that they can get, because you got one director for the entire band, can't obviously focus on percussion all the time.
I don't see why not.
Right.
Who cares about those articulations in the wind sections?
Right. But then you walk in and you've got them for 3 hours, but we also have to do drill and we have to do ensemble and we've got to make sure that everything's clean and we got to make sure of all these other things.
No, I get you.
You gotta fight.
He wants to talk. I'm gonna let you talk.
You gotta fight. You gotta fight for it. You gotta fight for the time, because that's the one variable that we all have access to, that either it's given or it's not, right? So if you fight for the time, then you can adequately plan, right? But if you don't have the time, then obviously you're I don't want to say you're more or less screwed. You're just you're in a very difficult situation that takes creativity, right? But with an entire group like that, I mean, you already know the fundamental items that they're gonna need to be successful from moment to moment. And if I were in that situation by myself, particularly, I would make sure that I always had dedicated space for those fundamentals, whether it's timing exercises, whether it's, you could have your front play scales while the battery plays timing exercises, and maybe the battery's working on dynamics while the front ensemble's working on note accuracy, right? Because some things are more important than others, right? Yes, the front ensemble needs to work on dynamics, but maybe the note accuracy is what they need right now. And the battery has to work on foot timing, but maybe what they need is dynamics right now, right? So there's ways that you can mix it up, but if you have the time available, then you can have, the liberty to kind of make those decisions. But fighting for that time is so important. And I know it's difficult because not every band director or whoever's responsible, whether if you have an ensemble coordinator, etc., they may not understand the total process of what it takes to have a great percussion section. But getting them to the understanding that you need that time by yourself in order to maximize their participation and the impact that they're going to have to the total ensemble, that's you got to fight for that time with them in understanding. I know that with my program, because I was telling y'all earlier, we don't have access to go to the school during the day. All the time we get is after school, so we do a whole lot of stuff over the summer. I mean, we front load as much as we can. I think this year we did 3 full weeks of camps, and I mean, the camps are like 4 to 9, 5 to 9, 6 to 9, so it's only like 3 or 4 hours a night for a week. But by front loading as much as we could, I think that allowed us to just set up our process of how we work on fundamentals so that when we bite size that down during the year, we still do it, right? Like with the battery in the front, we still take opportunities, like the first 20 minutes is fundamentals every rehearsal. Then we do the core exercise program for another 20. Then we are either learning show music for that last 20. Like if we get an hour before we join the band, we're either working show music or we're learning music or we're tracking. So it's like, and we can flex those different things, but I've found that like when we as an individual section kind of break it down into those 20-minute chunks or 15-minute chunks, you give yourself the opportunity to like do different things, but the kids are already accustomed to knowing that I only have this amount of time to do it. And then the second conversation that we have with them is that now that you understand what we're able to accomplish as an ensemble in an hour, use that as your example for your personal practice time. So if you only know you have an hour to practice this weekend, break it down into 3 20-minute chunks. Break it down into 4 15-minute chunks to work on different things. So we're teaching them how to rehearse themselves as well as kind of functioning inside of our system. But we have to do all that front load understanding and learning to be able to bite size it down as we get later into the season. And then, of course, the beauty about the extensive part of the season is that once the music's all memorized and learned and everything, the time that we would be using to learn music can absorb and make the tracking blocks longer, or it can absorb and make the the fundamental blocks longer. If we feel like we're solid on fundamentals, then that time can get absorbed into other things. Now maybe we're now doing more percussion ensemble stuff. Like it can change once you get into different sections of the season, just as long as like you kind of have to plan your season out from the jump of like what you want to be important. And I feel like we've talked about that a lot on our podcast, just like the importance of planning in advance. But I think we all understand that the hustle is not the 3 hours that you're going to be in there at rehearsal. The hustle is what is the time that you're putting in to plan for those 3 hours that you've got in that day. And unfortunately, some directors don't understand that you have to plan in advance. You can't just show up and say, all right, today I guess we're going to be doing this, which I have seen that multiple times over my career. But, ultimately planning in advance is going to allow you to maximize the time that you have available, because time is unfortunately the finite thing that we are all fighting for to be successful in our individual endeavors. So,
yeah. Just to tag on to that, I feel like the whole idea of fundamentals and has to come from somewhere as to like what your vision is for your percussion program. When it comes down to places like Texas and other school systems, they may already have in place like, this is what I feel like a 7th grader should know. This is what I feel like a 6th grader should know. This is what like an 8th grader should know. But for a lot of us that are not in school systems like that, like we have to decide what that is and decide, okay, what is my ultimate goal for my students after they leave this program, the high school program, the middle school program, etc. And allow that to inform all of the decisions that you make and how you plan out your rehearsals and how much time you spend on fundamentals, etc. For me, like that along with the fact that I've played traditional grip, like that informs my decision to have my students play traditional grip on marching snare drum on a flat drum. Because one of my goals is that if a student wants to march within a WGI group or a DCI group or a college group when they leave as a battery member, I want them to have the skills and the fundamentals necessary to be able to proceed that way and just learn the music or whatever other things that they need to. So think and program what I'm doing with that in mind. That, you know, every student obviously is going to know all of their 12 major scales, or every student's going to know all 24 of their 4-mallet permutations. Like, once we think through like what these ideas are, then we can go back, like you said, and like break down, okay, this is how many things they're going to learn at this age. This is where I want them to be when they come to the high school. And then also, I think one of the other things, starting to talk about like percussion ensemble literature, is like you can even go back then and start to think, okay, what percussion ensemble literature works on these things and would be appropriate for this group. So that now it's like, I mean, it's kind of like Yellow After the Rain. Like, no one really likes Yellow After the Rain, just to be honest. Sorry, Mitchell Peters. But at the same time, it's like you play Yellow After the Rain because it has all the basic stroke types in it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the reason why you play Yellow After the Rain. You know what I mean? It's I think that's more the, I guess the linear way of thinking about like why you would program something. And hopefully that's something that I think helps students to be able to see like, oh, okay, this is what I'm going to be able to do when I get to this level. And even though I'm learning these basics, like there's always a deeper level for me to go in these basics. Because when you look at great percussionists, great musicians, one thing that they all have across the board is they are very good at fundamentals, but they all understand fundamentals on a very high level. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So I feel like that's another part of it, as it relates to like just breaking that barrier between like your best player and your worst player, is like having things that you go over every year. Like Ryan was saying, like, yeah, we clean that roll, but our rhythmic accuracy is really not that good. So at the beginning of the season, I'm going to go over grip, form, and playing areas every single time. You are in this program and you march indoor and outdoor, you're going to hear me go over this 8 times. And you're going to hear it again and be like, oh, this is the reason why we hold the stick a fourth of the way from the bottom, because it bounces the most. This is the reason why we do blah, blah, blah. I'm going to say it every single time like you just have no clue, right? Just because, again, you can always be reminded of that and like know that on a deeper level. So I would say an encouragement to other educators is like, not be afraid to go over basic things like consistently, right? Throughout the season, throughout the year. Like, don't be afraid to revisit those things, because the greatest ensembles that you know, they all know those things like the back of their hand all the time.
Quiz your kids.
Mm-hmm.
Quiz them often. I do it even when we're just standing on standby and waiting. I'm like, well, where should your left hand be on the drum right now? My hand should be parallel to the drum. Thank you. I quiz them. You can't, like that kind of stuff. It's like they don't understand sometimes what they even already know until they're asked to recall it. And that's super important too.
Well,
Ryan,
sorry. That's also engaging to the kids, like, because you don't know when they're like, man, I wonder what I'm having for dinner, in 3 weeks. And then you ask them about their left hand, they're like, oh yeah, okay, focus on this thing. All right. And I tell my kids too, like, hey, if you've taken a comment more than once, like, that's the thing you got to focus on. Because just pressing upon the kids, because like we were talking about, we've only got 3 hours. Sometimes it's not about how much you rehearse, but like how you actually rehearse and how students engage and think through a rehearsal, and how we engage and think through a rehearsal. Like, are we priming the kids to think what we want them to think before we ever get started? Like, hey, I know Susie's had a hard time with 16 notes, so we're just going to sing a bar of 16 notes, and then we're going to play, and then we're going to think 2 beats of 16 notes, and then we're going to prime 1 beat of 16 notes, and then we're just going to play 1 beat of 16 notes, and then do that kind of thing. And I think going to the planning, basically we're talking about timelining out a season, which I believe that we did a previous episode on. I think sometimes you have to timeline out multiple years.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Like my first year at my high school, I'm a competitive fella. But as soon as I got in, did my assessment of the kids, it's like, all right, so we're not going to be competitive right now, but we will be in 5 years. but I have to set up a plan that will get us to there and not go, okay, what's going to make us competitive right now? Because if we're competitive right now, we have to do the same thing again next year. And then the next year is going to be the same thing instead of like stair stepping up.
Okay. I think you bring up a really good point, and I really want to talk about this because I think there are a lot of programs that and people that use this phrase that like, oh, okay, this is a down year. Oh, okay, this is a rebuilding year. To me, and I mean, y'all tell me what y'all think. I personally don't think there is such a thing. I think you're always rebuilding. You should always be building to get to that point. You know what I mean?
You should always be building.
So you shouldn't feel like, oh, okay. But I feel like the other part of that is, as an educator, are you only looking to teach them to be competitive? Meaning you're only teaching them the skill sets that they're going to need to play in that show. You're only working on marching band stuff. You're only working on solo and ensemble, percussion ensemble stuff, and you're not increasing their level as a musician? Or are you trying to increase the total level of the musician so that no matter what instrument, no matter what literature they run into, they're automatically better, which does help the competitive aspect of it, but it helps it in the long run. It might not help it in the short run.
Well, I think it's very telling that people only use the term it's a rebuilding year in music and in sports when they're not competitive. I think that's the most telling sign, is like it's only rebuilding when we're not winning. Versus like nobody has a rebuilding year. Like LeBron James doesn't have a rebuilding year. LeBron might not have been as good that year, but he's not going to come out and say, well, yeah, I was, rebuilding my mechanics. I was rebuilding how to put the ball in the hoop. Like,
that's what the off season is for, right? The off season is to restructure and reattest to your fundamentals. And I think we can take a lot from pro sports in thinking about that and how they do training camps and baseball camps, etc., is where they slow back down to like basic shots, basic hits, basic plays, so that they can have a full re-understanding of what it is that they're being asked to do at an extremely high level, right? But I will tell you, even in my corporate day job, trying to get people to understand that if we don't reinforce what we learned in training, like when we first got hired, you can't consistently do that over the course of 365 days. Because if you're not actively using it, you are losing the capacity to do it at a high level. And that's just the thing. If you're only teaching what's in the show, you're losing all the other stuff that they need to know. And percussion is so expansive. We can't afford to only learn what we're using in the show. We have to continually reinforce. I know John's got some stuff to say, and something popped into my head of like a phrase that we could use. Yeah, you had some stuff. To vertically align, you have to horizontally timeline. Like that popped in my head when Rob was talking, like just you have to horizontally timeline in order to vertically align your program, because if you're only thinking vertically what you're going to do from a day to day, you're not thinking about the total picture of what you're trying to accomplish. Like Ryan said, from the first day that you set foot in, and what do I want to see in 5 years, and what is it going to take for me to get there? It's all not going to happen on day one.
That is my nugget for the day. I'm taking that. I think that's great. I think that that's also a secret weapon that we see from really, really consistent programs. You know what I mean? I think that it's easy when we see consistency out of a group to just think, oh, okay, well, they're in this part of the, country where everyone's super consistent and all the kids start piano at 5 and this and that. And that's very true. But that does not mean that putting those people together into an ensemble that sounds that way is easy, right? Because you're still trying to get all these different people, all these different skill sets to play at a high level together. You know what I mean? So I feel like that planning aspect of it, like you said, like you can't be vertically aligned until you horizontally timeline. Like you have to have that vision as the percussion instructor, or, and I mean, I think you could think about it on a smaller level too, because I mean, everyone that, you know, is in our audience might not necessarily be a caption head or percussion instructor that's, you know, running an entire program. Even if I was just a snare tech, you know what I mean, at my high school, and thinking about, okay, well, the director said that we want to be at this level. Well, how do I create a snare line that's at that level? How do I also make sure that there's other snares in the wings, like waiting for the next year and like building them up to get there? How do I do that? Well, you have to think horizontally. Okay, this is where we're trying to go. And like, okay, so this day we need to hit this, we need to hit this. I know that they have full battery exercises, but we need to do this primer. We need to do this primer. We need to do this video assignment. And I need to have all these kids be able to understand how to do this without the fingers on, so that when they do come over, like they're ready to put the other fingers on and do whatever next step is happening. So I think that we shouldn't neglect, you know, no matter what level we're on, like we have a level of planning that we can do that like helps the total, you know, percussion ensemble.
I think that's important for students to think of too. Like, you don't just trip and fall into the center snare role or the section leader role. Like, you got to timeline out your own personal progression as well.
Mm-hmm.
You know? So I think this is not just for like directors, designers, you know, educators. I think students need to take this kind of stuff to heart and be like, all right, so I don't have hours to practice. I only got 15 minutes today. What is the most important thing? Well, the most important thing is this. And then the most important thing is this, or the most important thing is to build off that to get to the next thing. So I think this is just as important for students as it is for the education side, the educator side.
Yeah,
No,
I think. Go ahead, John.
No, you go.
I was going to say students really have to understand, especially in that high school range, that it's going to take an extra amount of effort if there's multiple things that you want to do, right? Like, I recall being a sophomore in high school, I was still a bass drummer, knowing that my eyes were on the prize to get into that snare line, that I had to also know all my bass music and be competent and good at it with proper technique, but I also had to dedicate a significant amount of time to learning how to play a snare drum, because when the auditions came around, they weren't teaching me how to play a snare drum in auditions. I had to be able to play the snare drum in auditions. Now, they would be refining after that, but we weren't like learning the tech. Like, I had to learn it in the off season, but I was also still responsible for what I was responsible for as a performer. And that's something that students have to understand, that I think there is a level of education shift that has happened over a generation. And I say a generation just over maybe 10 to 15 years. That's what I'll define as a generation, that has said that if I want to learn a new skill, someone will be available to teach it to me. That's not true. I mean, that's not true. Someone will be available to teach it to you. But I think there is a confusion on that timeline, that you're thinking someone's going to teach it to you when you show up for day one for the job. And that's not always the case. When you get hired at a job where you're responsible for working on a computer, we're not teaching you how to use a computer. We're teaching you how to use the system on the computer that we use. You need to learn how to use a computer before you get here, right? And that's where I think sometimes students kind of misinterpret that information, is like, you need to start asking questions and get a heads up on some fundamental aspect of what it is that you're going to be asked to do, so that we can start refining it when you get into the situation. But like, day one showing up and you're expected to learn everything, that's a little bit short-sighted, especially once you're already in the system. John, sorry.
It's all right. You guys are giving great information. I don't really remember what I was going to say most of the time. Probably the first thing I was going to ask was way back then, Ryan. It's like, for your classes, do you see your kids every day? Are they AB classes, 45 minutes, hour and a half?
So we just switched to a block schedule this year. Originally, they were 45 minutes, and I would see most of the kids, just because the middle school and the high school are not the same day. But now the middle school's on a 5-day-a-week schedule because they were on a 2-day-a-week schedule. And the high school's now on a 2-day-a-week block schedule. And Fridays are what we call mini days. They compact all 8 classes into the same day. So with my 6th graders, they're still on a 2-day schedule. I see them Monday, Wednesday, and every other Friday. And right now we're just working on like counting rhythms and note naming stuff. But now I see my 7th graders on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and every other Friday. And then we were super fortunate to start a symphonic band class, which is a mixture of our 7th and 8th graders, of our top 7th and 8th graders, that I see 5 days a week. And then I see my 8th graders 2 days a week because that overlaps with the high school. And I see each group an hour that I see them. And then at the high school, I see on our block days, I see each band for 90 minutes. I see one band on Monday, Wednesday, and I see 2 bands on Tuesdays, Thursdays. And I see everybody for 45 minutes on Fridays when we have a 5-day week.
Sure. With my school, since it's like a magnet school, and they can't really put my kids in the right classes because, I got kids in culinary who have to have the first 4.5 hours of their day blocked off to go do culinary because they got, cook for 4.5 hours. So they put them in whatever band classes they can. So 3 things I found, at least for me, that's helped with my band programs, because our school is also an AB, hour-and-a-half classes. And you guys have already touched on this many times. Number one, just hitting fundamentals every day. And then I used to, early on, I'd hit, 30 minutes to 45 minutes of fundamentals. And then the last 45 minutes, I do, show beats or whatnot. For me personally, I get bored with that just because it takes a long time. And I know you got to hit all your fundamentals. And I'm thinking more battery percussion because I have my front kids play the same battery stuff. You got to do your 2 height axes, your 2 height exercises, your rolls, your taps, your flams, like your, all the really cool stuff that makes drumming really cool, your timing stuff, whatever. How do you do that quickly without getting bored? And so I have found, number one, using a timer. So I just put it around we share, it depends on the class, but we share spaces with the band. So I take my kids with me into my office. And so I just have it on the computer screen so we all see it. All right, I got 5 minutes. Here we go. We're going to work on this exercise. Boom. And I may get a deep dive on one skill set for that day and then just hit everything very quickly instead of hit everything in depth. But I also try to think, you said, timeline, the horizontal of what skill sets you want to teach. I know I'm going to be teaching this stuff for the next 3 months. So I don't have to get super detailed on the first day of every week of this is how you play a downstroke or whatnot. Like, all right, let's do it. We'll figure it out. Mm-hmm. And we're not even going to go fast. We're just going to go this speed. Okay, cool. And the next time, okay, we'll go 20 clicks faster. Okay, we'll go 10 clicks slower or whatever and change it up. But I've also found that starting on time is so important. I mean, my kids are lazy. Yes, my kids are so slow and lazy. But I have now gone out of my way 10 minutes before class starts and just like, all right, we got to get moving. Let's get set up. This is the goal. This is where we're getting set up. Let's get our pads, let's get our sticks. Let's go. And then when the bell rings and I'm like, all right, we're tapping, we're going, like that extra 10 minutes of them that used to move around, I get done with all my stuff so quickly. And then I'm just like, what? I got all this time now. This is crazy. And if you don't have, for those that are listening, if you don't have your own type of warm-up packet that you can hit your fundamentals in 10 minutes or less, I mean, there's some great things out there. I've used a couple of them. One of them that comes to the top of my head is like the 5-minute drill, Daily Classroom Routines for Percussion by Eric Rath and Ralph Hicks. I think they also have like a 9-minute one. I haven't used that. And I've tried to do their 5-minute one. It wasn't a great success for me. Not that the exercises were unplayable. They were totally achievable. But just for me personally, incorporating it into my curriculum already, I was struggling with that. And I try a little bit because you kind of have to give that book to each of the kids because it comes with its own practice log. It comes with all the fundamental exercises. And literally, it just takes 5 minutes. It's a play along track, slow, medium, fast tempos, and it was really cool. I was just unable to apply it to my curriculum with my kids the way I was teaching. But you may have success if you're listening and you're looking for a quick, what can I hit with these percussionists in the back for fundamentals. That's a great piece. It's called 5-Minute Drill, Daily Classroom Routines for Percussion. But yeah, timer, starting your class on time, even if the other band kids are moving slow, and then just not getting bogged. For me, fundamentals are extremely important, but not getting bogged down in them. So I take 15 minutes of my hour and a half. We do marching. We're always marking time and we're playing. If I'm noticing a kid is not at that skill level, okay, don't mark time. You're just working on this. And I'm always making a mental note. Okay, that kid is on my radar after school. Even if they suck, we're gonna mark time. I'll be tapping on their shoulders the entire time, or I'm gonna get a partner. Boom. And then we go do our 15-minute keyboard fundamentals. All right, we're doing 4-mount fundamentals on the floor. Hey, we're doing some scales. And I typically do that all together, advanced kids, young kids. And if I'm feeling that maybe the skill exercises are too basic, I'm totally cool with just like, yo, advanced kids, go work on this in another practice room. Or, hey, you have freedom to go practice district music or the show beats, et cetera, et cetera. But typically after that first half hour of the fundamentals, then that last hour, we're doing show beats, split up, because again, I'm sharing with the band. So all my kids are in practice rooms and I'm just going from station to station, or we're doing region music. And I have found here in Texas specifically, region, you have to do a 2-mallet, a timpani, and a snare. It's like in Georgia, district music. I never really did that much in high school, but it is so important. I'm realizing now. And there's a lot of pushback when I first introduced my kids who never did it. But incorporating, you have to learn this etude. That the Texas says if you want to go be a part of the best bands, you got to do these skill sets. Throwing those kids over the long run. I've been doing this 4 or 5 years now at this school, and having those kids go into those opportunities to listen to other kids that are better than them opens up the world of, okay, I need to go practice. Or there's more out there than just where I currently am seeing in my school. So by doing the half-hour fundamentals, half-hour of region, half-hour show, knowing that I'm going to do fundamentals after school and then show beats a lot after school, I'm allowing the students to focus high intensity for short amount of period very quickly. And so I don't know, with your situation that you were mentioning, how do I do this and this and this with all these different skill gaps, and there's only just me? And I know we've talked about student leadership many times on this podcast, but also just giving opportunities for the kids to practice and just moving around. When I was at Southwind this past summer, and you guys were unfortunately not on during the time I was on, for whatever reason, there was limited staff, just transition phases, sectionals, and really allowing the student leadership to be like, here's what we're doing. I'll let you decide, but you have a half-hour fundamentals, half-hour movement 1, half-hour movement 2, sectionals, and then full battery, upper battery, lower battery, full pit, and then full perk. Breaking it down, having that timeline of what you guys have mentioned, I think will help anyone who's listening who's by themselves and kind of overwhelmed and not knowing how am I supposed to teach all these different things simultaneously. I think if you just teach a little bit every single day, the next 4 months you're going to be fine. Yeah. And that goes back to my teaching tip way back early on this podcast, right? You taught your drill dots set by set by set, but now you're starting to clean. All right, you're starting to do some sequences. You're finding some patterns that they can easily replicate. And it's, again, still the beginning of football season, cleaning. We still have late September, October, even maybe some November, depending on who's listening for band. It's going to get better over a long period of time. With just small bite-sized chunks every day, high intensity. You'll be fine.
And that's the John Gaal guarantee.
For those that are watching. You can see it. I guarantee. And if you have any questions, you can always email us at voltapercussion@gmail.com for more tips and tricks, pass outs, handouts, Zoom one-on-one meeting calls. Well, happy to help and discuss your specific situation. Need a mentor? Need someone that you could just bounce an idea off of? We're open to it. We're here to help you. And in so doing, we help ourselves learn more and maybe apply your situation to our situation in certain aspects, and overall continue to change the conversation for the better.
I gotta give Rob his flowers for that. Changing the conversation. That nugget right there, I think, just speaks worlds to how we approach education and changing that conversation multiple times, because your life moves directionally one way. And if you're not changing, if you're not, continuing to elevate and evolve, then you can get stagnant and you can get left behind, frankly. You know what I mean? So, wow. Okay, Josh. Oh man.
Boy. It feels like we come to a great end. I feel like John definitely put a cap on things. So listen, thank you guys for watching this episode. Anyone that's been checking us out, we greatly appreciate it. Thank you guys for sticking around for season 4, whether or not you've been listening to us since season 1 or you just jumping on. We appreciate you guys for listening all over the world. Our contact, you can find us on any social media or at our email at voltapercussion@gmail or at Volta Percussion on Instagram, and is it just Instagram?
Instagram,
Spotify
YouTube
as well.
YouTube. You can watch it.
You can check us out any Apple Podcasts,
iHeartMedia.
Media. Okay. You can check us out on any of those platforms. And thank you for hopping on and continuing to change the conversation as a percussion educator and music educator. So we will see you guys on the next one. Peace.
Good luck, everyone.